My uncle looked at me across the conference table and said, "You'll apologize to Connor in front of the team, or you're done here." I looked back at him, and for the first time in 4 years, I didn't say sorry. I should start from the beginning because the ending only makes sense if you know what it cost me to get there. My name is Vivian. I'm 28 years old, and for 4 years I worked at my family's logistics consulting firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. My uncle, my dad's older brother, had built the company from nothing in the early 2000s. Small operation, maybe 60 employees, but steady. Good reputation. The kind of firm that doesn't make headlines but keeps the lights on through word of mouth and long client relationships. When my dad passed away from a heart attack 3 years ago, my uncle became the closest thing I had to a father figure. I believed that. I really did. I joined the firm right out of college. Finance degree from UNC Charlotte, graduated with honors. Student debt I was very much aware of every single month. I didn't take the job because it was easy. I took it because I thought I was building something. My uncle told me during my interview, yes, he still made me do a formal interview, which I respected, that there would be no special treatment. Family is family. Work is work. I shook his hand and told him that was exactly what I wanted to hear. For 2 years, that was true. I started in the analyst pool, did the grunt work, stayed late, learned the systems. My supervisor at the time, a woman named Helen, told me I was the fastest learner she'd had in that seat in a decade. I wasn't the loudest person in the room, but I did the work, and the work showed. Then my cousin arrived. Connor is my uncle's son. He's 24, which at the time meant he'd just finished a business degree at a mid-tier school in South Carolina, the school my uncle had specifically chosen for him because he thought the environment would be less competitive. Connor had never held a real job. He'd done one internship at a friend's real estate office for a summer, which mostly involved him sitting at a desk scrolling on his phone, based on what he told me himself at a family dinner. He was charming, sure. Good-looking in that easy, forgettable way. He laughed at his own jokes a half-second before anyone else did. I didn't dislike him. I just knew exactly what he was. He was hired as a senior project coordinator. I was an analyst who had been passed over for that same title 8 months earlier. Despite Helen's written recommendation, the HR manager, who reported directly to my uncle, told me the timing wasn't right. I nodded. I kept working. My uncle paired Connor with me. Officially, we were co-leads on a major account, a regional grocery chain called Harwick Foods that was looking to overhaul its entire supply chain management system. Unofficially, I was doing the work and Connor was learning how to do the work, which would have been fine if anyone had said that out loud. But they didn't. On paper, we were equal. In the Monday meetings, my uncle addressed questions to Connor first. When Connor got confused, which was often, he'd look at me and I'd answer. And my uncle would nod at Connor like Connor had prompted the right thought. It took 6 months to build the Harwick proposal. 6 months of evenings, of weekends, of learning their existing vendor contracts inside out, of building cost models in Excel that my uncle still calls those spreadsheet things. I interviewed their logistics director 4 times. I flew to their regional warehouse in Greensboro on my own time. The proposal was 112 pages. I wrote 104 of them. Connor wrote the executive summary. To his credit, he did a decent job on it. We presented to Harwick in March. They signed in April. A $2.3 million contract over 3 years, the largest single account the firm had closed in 6 years. My uncle stood up at the all-hands meeting and thanked the team. He mentioned Connor by name twice. He mentioned me once in passing as part of the team that supported the effort. I went back to my desk. I ate my lunch. I did not cry because I had gotten very good at not crying at work. That was April. By June, I had built out the full implementation timeline for Harwick, onboarded their team onto our project management platform, and begun the quarterly review cycle. Everything was running. Then my uncle announced that Connor would be taking over as the primary point of contact for the account. He needs the client-facing experience, my uncle said to me privately, in that tone adults use when they're explaining something they know is unfair but have already decided. You understand. I said I understood. I did not say what I actually thought, which was that I had built this thing from scratch and was now being asked to hand it to someone who could not read a freight invoice without asking me what half the line items meant. I kept my mouth shut because I needed the salary. My mother had had a rough year medically. Nothing life-threatening, but enough specialists and enough copays to put a dent in my savings. I had my student loans. I had a lease on an apartment I liked in Noda and wasn't ready to give up. I had reasons to stay, so I stayed. July came, August. I was still doing most of the actual Harwick work. Connor would forward me emails from their logistics director and write thoughts above them. But Connor was the one attending the dinners, the one my uncle praised in board updates, the one whose name was going on everything. I had become, inside the firm I had given 4 years to, functionally invisible. And then came the Thursday in September that broke everything open. We had a team meeting, standard weekly review. I had flagged a potential issue in the Harwick implementation, a gap in their cold storage vendor contract that could expose them to significant penalty fees if we didn't renegotiate a specific clause before their Q4 ramp-up. It was a real problem. I had a memo prepared. I walked into the meeting ready to present it. Except Connor had gotten into the conference room before me. He was standing at the whiteboard, and he was presenting my memo, word for word. He had found a draft in our shared drive, a folder I thought was accessible only to me, but had been set to team view. And he was reading it out loud, slowly, like he was interpreting scripture. I sat down. I said nothing. I watched my uncle nod along. I watched the rest of the team take notes. At the end, my uncle said, "Connor, this is exactly the kind of proactive thinking I've been talking about." Connor smiled. He glanced at me for 1/2 second. There was something in that glance, not guilt, not even smugness exactly, more like relief, like he'd been nervous about getting caught, and now realized he wasn't going to be. I waited until after the meeting. I went to my uncle's office and closed the door. I told him what had happened. Calmly. I even pulled up the document metadata on my laptop. The file showed my name, my creation date, my edit history. It was clear. My uncle looked at it. He looked at me. He said, "Vivian, Connor told me you two developed this together and you're upset he presented it. I think you're being a little sensitive." I said we had not developed it together. I said I had written it alone over 2 evenings and Connor had found it in the shared drive without telling me. My uncle said, "You're on the same team. Shared resources are shared resources." I stared at him. He said, "I think you owe Connor an apology for making this into something it isn't. He's working hard to get up to speed, and this kind of friction isn't helping." I said, "You want me to apologize to him?" "I want you to be a team player," he said. "Which, honestly, is something I've been wanting to talk to you about. You've always been a little isolated, a little territorial about your work. It's something you should think about." I had never been written up, never missed a deadline, never had a client complaint. Helen's reviews of my work were in my file and they were glowing, and I was being told I was territorial. I said, "I'll think about it." And I left. That night, I did not sleep much. I lay in bed and I made a list on my phone. Not an emotional list, a practical one. What I had. What I was owed. White linen tablecloth. White linen tablecloths. White linen tables in jars. Emails I had sent directly to Harwick contacts, which showed client relationships my uncle didn't know I'd built independently. A chain of messages with Helen going back 2 years that documented my contributions in writing. Quarterly reports I had authored, some of which had my name on them, some of which had been quietly reattributed, and something else, something I'd been sitting on for 6 months because I hadn't known if I was going to need it. In March, right after the Harwick signing, I had been contacted by a recruiter, not a cold LinkedIn message, an actual call, from a woman who said she'd been referred to me specifically by a former colleague. The firm was a mid-sized supply chain consultancy based in Raleigh, growing fast, looking for someone with exactly my profile. The conversation had been good. I'd been flattered, but I was in the middle of implementation, and I told her I wasn't ready to talk seriously. She had told me to call her when I was. I called her on a Friday evening in September, 3 days after my uncle's office. Her name was Patricia. Wait. No. I need to use a different name. Her name was the recruiter, I'll just say that. She remembered me. We talked for 90 minutes. By the end of the call, I had a second interview scheduled for the following week. I am going to be very specific about what I did next, because I want anyone listening who is in a similar situation to understand I did not make any rash moves. I did not quit. I did not confront my cousin again. I did not send a dramatic email. I went back to work on Monday like nothing had happened. But I also started doing something I should have done years earlier. I started keeping records. Every email that showed my contributions, every document with my name in the metadata, every communication with Harwick, contacts that established me as a trusted advisor, not just a back-office analyst. I saved everything to my personal cloud account. Nothing proprietary, nothing that belonged to the firm, just my own work product and my own correspondence. I talked to an employment attorney. I paid for a 1-hour consultation, and she walked me through what I could and could not take with me if I left. She also told me something that mattered, because I had independently cultivated several of the Harwick relationships, and because nothing in my employment contract restricted me from working with clients who came to me voluntarily after my departure. I had more latitude than I thought. I went through my second interview, then a third. I was offered a position as a senior engagement manager, 2 steps above my current title, with a base salary of $94,000. My current salary was $61,000. There was also a signing bonus. I accepted on a Tuesday. I gave myself 1 week before I said anything. During that week, I finished every open deliverable I had. I documented all my ongoing work in a handover file so detailed that a junior analyst could have picked it up. I did this not because I owed them that, but because I had always been the person who finished what she started, and I didn't want to change that in the last week. On Friday, I walked into the office. Normal morning, I got coffee. I chatted with 2 coworkers I actually liked. At 10 o'clock, we had the weekly all hands. My uncle opened it by praising Connor for a client update he had sent, an update I had drafted and sent to Connor for review, and which he had forwarded to my uncle verbatim with his name on the send line. My uncle said, "This is the kind of initiative I want to see more of." I watched Connor smile and nod. I thought about the Thursday in September. About 4 years. About my dad, who had been so proud when I got this job. Then my uncle said, "Any other updates?" I raised my hand. I had not told anyone I was resigning. My HR paperwork was already submitted through the online portal. I'd done it that morning, so it was official before I walked in, but no one had seen it yet. I said, "I actually have an update. Today is my last day. I've accepted a position at another firm." The room went very quiet. My uncle looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not anger, confusion, which on him looked almost like the same thing. He said, "We can discuss this after the meeting." I said, "Of course." And I sat back down and let him finish running the meeting, because I was professional until the last moment, and I always had been. He called me into his office the second the meeting ended. Connor was already in there, which I had not expected. I don't know if my uncle had texted him or if Connor had followed on his own. But there he was, standing near the window with his arms crossed. Like this was a mediation. My uncle said, "You should have come to me first." I said, "I submitted my resignation this morning through HR. I've given 2 weeks' notice, which is more than required by my contract." He said, "What firm?" I told him. He said the name back to me slowly, processing it. Then, "The Harwick work. You can't take that with you." I said, "I'm not taking anything proprietary. I'm taking myself." Connor spoke up. He said, "Did you reach out to any of their people, their internal contacts?" I looked at him. I said, "I've built real professional relationships over the past 4 years. Some of those people know my work. If they choose to contact me after I've left, that's their prerogative. I haven't solicited anyone." My uncle's face changed. I think it was the word solicited. He was realizing, maybe for the first time, that I had talked to someone who knew what words like that meant and what they protected. He said, "Vivian, I know this year has been frustrating. If there are things I could have handled better," I said, "I appreciate that." He said, "We could revisit your title, your compensation." I said, "I appreciate that too." And I meant neither. He looked at Connor. Connor was still standing near the window, and for the first time since he'd joined the firm, he didn't look relieved. He looked like someone who had just understood something. Not what he'd done wrong exactly, but what it had cost. My uncle said, "I want you to think hard about this. Your father worked alongside me for years. This firm has family in its foundation." That one landed. I won't pretend it didn't. My throat went tight for a second. I thought about my dad. The way he used to talk about this firm at the dinner table, the pride in his voice, the way he'd squeezed my shoulder when I got the offer letter. But I also thought about that Thursday meeting, about the words "a little sensitive," about 4 years of work that had someone else's name on it. I said, "My dad taught me to work hard and do things right. I learned that here, I'm taking it with me." And I walked out. My official last day was 2 weeks later, but my uncle called HR that same afternoon and asked if I could be walked out early. I was. I packed my desk in about 20 minutes. I didn't have much. I'd always kept my workspace minimal. And I said goodbye to the people I wanted to say goodbye to. Helen texted me that evening. She'd heard through the grapevine. She said, "Good, you should have left a year ago. Don't look back." I didn't cry until I got to my car. Then I sat in the parking garage and let myself cry for about 4 minutes, because 4 years deserves at least that. I started the new job 10 days later. 6 weeks after I left, I got a LinkedIn message from Harwick's logistics director. His name is James, and he is one of the most meticulous, detail-oriented people I have ever worked with, which is exactly why I liked working with him. His message said that the transition on their account had been rocky, that some things had fallen through the cracks, and that he'd heard I was at a new firm. He asked if we could talk. We talked. I was careful. I did not reach out to him. He reached out to me, which matters. I told him exactly that when I mentioned it to our VP. He came to me. "I want to be transparent." She nodded. "Handle it right," she said. I did. Harwick moved their account 4 months later. Not the full contract. They had obligations to fulfill. But they restructured and brought a portion of the new work to my firm, with me as the engagement lead. My uncle called me when it happened. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 60% accusation and 40% something that almost sounded like respect. I listened to it once and then deleted it. Connor, I've heard, is still at the firm. Still senior project coordinator. He runs the weekly meetings now, apparently. One of my old coworkers told me that he'd started keeping his drafts in a personal folder rather than the shared drive, which made her laugh when she told me. Small lessons, learned slowly. I don't think about any of it that much anymore. Raleigh is a good city. My new team is the kind of team where people actually read each other's work before presenting it, which turns out to be the bare minimum I needed to stop dreading Sunday nights. My mother's health has been better this year. We had Thanksgiving at her house in Concord, and she asked me, the way she always does when she wants to ask something big, she asked me casually, while doing dishes, if I was happy. I thought about my uncle's conference table, about that all-hands meeting, about the parking garage. I said, "Yeah, Mom, I think I actually am." She handed me a dish towel and said, "Good, your father would have wanted that." I dried the dishes and I didn't say anything else, because sometimes there isn't anything else to say. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the resignation meeting, not the Harwick call, not even the parking garage. It's the Thursday meeting, the one where I sat down and watched Connor read my words out loud and call them his. I didn't storm out. I didn't interrupt. I just sat there and I thought, okay, now I know exactly what this place is. That moment clarified something I'd been too comfortable to see clearly. For 4 years, I had worked hard and assumed the work would speak for itself. I believed that if I kept my head down, kept delivering, kept being the most prepared person in the room, eventually the right people would notice. What I didn't account for was that in an environment built on favoritism, competence isn't rewarded. It's borrowed. My uncle didn't ignore my contributions. He used them. There's a difference, and understanding that difference is what finally moved me. I think about what it actually takes to walk away from something you've invested years in, and I don't think it's anger. Anger was there, sure, but anger alone doesn't get you through a job search while you're still showing up every day pretending nothing happened. What got me through was something quieter, a kind of clarity about what I was worth and what I was willing to accept. I had to be honest with myself in a way I'd been avoiding. I had to look at my situation without the comfort of, it'll get better, and ask, will it, actually? The answer was no. And once I admitted that, the path forward wasn't complicated, it was just hard. I also had to be smart about it. Not dramatic, not reactive, methodical. The consultation with the employment attorney, the documentation, the careful handling of the Harwick relationship after I left. None of that was revenge. It was just doing things right. There's a version of this story where I blow up in my uncle's office and make it easy for him to paint me as the difficult one. I've thought about that version. It would have felt good for about 30 seconds and cost me everything. Instead, I finished my work. I kept my word. I left a handover document so thorough it probably annoyed whoever opened it. I did all of that because I wasn't going to let this place change who I was on the way out. Connor is still there, I'm told. Still in the same title. I don't say that with satisfaction. I genuinely don't think about it much. But I do think about what it means to be handed things you haven't built. There's a specific kind of hollowness in that, and I think on some level he knows it. Borrowed credit doesn't compound. It just sits there. My mother asked me on Thanksgiving if I was happy. I've thought about that question a lot since then because happiness felt too simple a word for what I actually felt. What I felt was settled. Like I had made a decision based on my own values, and it had held, like the version of myself my dad raised, the one who finishes things, who keeps records, who doesn't wait for someone else to validate her work, had made it through intact. That's the thing I'd want anyone in a similar situation to hold on to. Not that good things will automatically happen to good people, because the world doesn't run on that kind of simple accounting, but that when you do the work honestly, when you build real relationships and real skills and real receipts, you give yourself options. You are not powerless. You just have to be patient enough and clear-eyed enough and willing enough to act when the moment comes. The moment came. I acted. The rest followed.